Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. A routine evening. The Los Angeles sunset painted the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, a picturesque backdrop for the hustle and bustle of one of the busiest airports in the world. Sarah Mitchell navigated her modest Honda Accord through the winding lanes leading to the private terminal. At 38, Sarah was the epitome of success, yet her unassuming demeanor and grounded personality made her seem like any other traveler. Her hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as she reflected on the week that had passed, 5 days of relentless meetings, deal negotiations, and corporate presentations. Her flight back to Atlanta was not just an escape, it was a chance to recharge. Sarah's position as the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the nation came with immense pressure, but she handled it with a calm confidence that many admired. Stepping out of her car, she pulled a small, sleek black suitcase from the trunk, along with her laptop bag. Her attire was simple, a navy blue blouse paired with tailored black slacks and comfortable walking shoes. The pearl earrings she wore were her only nod to formality, a cherished gift from her late grandmother that she never traveled without. The private terminal was quieter than the main airport, exuding an air of exclusivity. Sarah had opted for this terminal to save time, but she still preferred to carry her own luggage and forego unnecessary pomp. As she approached the entrance, her calm evening was suddenly disrupted. At the door, 2 police officers were stationed, their presence unusual for the private terminal. Their expressions were stern, and their eyes darted toward her as she approached. Sarah offered a polite nod, assuming they were conducting routine checks. She fished out her identification and travel documents from her bag, holding them ready. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the officers, a tall man with sharp features, called out, stepping into her path. "We need to speak with you." Startled but unbothered, Sarah stopped. "Is there an issue, officer?" The second officer, a woman with a tight bun and a clipboard in hand, scrutinized Sarah's appearance. Her gaze lingered on Sarah's luggage and attire, then flicked to her face. "We've had reports of individuals loitering near this terminal," she said, her tone clipped. "May we see your identification?" Sarah complied without hesitation, handing over her driver's license. "Of course. I'm here to catch a flight." The male officer studied the ID before passing it back with a skeptical glance. "And who are you flying with, ma'am?" Sarah's brows furrowed slightly. "I'm on a private charter. The name of the company is Mitchell Enterprises." The female officer's lips tightened. "Do you have any proof of that?" Sarah blinked. "Proof? I believe my ID should suffice. I can also show you my boarding pass." The male officer stepped forward, his demeanor shifting to one of authority. "Ma'am, we're asking routine questions. No need to get defensive." Sarah remained calm but firm. "I'm not being defensive. I just don't see why I'm being singled out." The tension between them grew, drawing the attention of a few staff members nearby. One of them, a young man in a crisp uniform, hesitated before stepping closer. "Excuse me," he interjected nervously, "Ms. Mitchell is a frequent traveler here. Is everything okay?" The officers exchanged a glance before dismissing the staffer. "We'll handle this," the male officer said gruffly. He then turned back to Sarah. "We've had reports of suspicious activity, and we need to ensure that everything checks out. Please wait here." Sarah's patience began to wear thin, but she maintained her composure. "Officer, I understand you have a job to do, but I've given you my identification and explained my purpose here. If you need additional verification, I can contact my assistant or the pilot." The female officer crossed her arms, her voice tinged with condescension. "That won't be necessary, for now. We just want to ensure this terminal remains secure." Sarah's heart sank. The implication was clear, she didn't look like she belonged. Another staff member, a senior supervisor, approached. His face paled slightly when he recognized Sarah. "Ms. Mitchell," he said quickly, "is there a problem?" The officer stiffened but said nothing as Sarah explained the situation. The supervisor nodded, his expression a mix of concern and embarrassment. Officers, Ms. Mitchell is a respected client here. She doesn't need to be detained. The male officer bristled. We're following protocol. The supervisor's tone sharpened. Protocol or not, Ms. Mitchell is entitled to be treated with respect. If there's no valid reason to hold her, I suggest you let her proceed. Reluctantly, the officer stepped aside. Sarah thanked the supervisor and walked into the terminal, her mind swirling. The interaction had been brief, but it left a mark, a bitter reminder of the biases she had worked her entire life to overcome. She resolved to put it behind her, but as she boarded her private jet, a gnawing thought lingered, this wasn't just about her. Little did she know, this incident would set in motion a chain of events that would test not just her character, but the integrity of those around her. Shadows of assumptions. As the jet's engines hummed to life, Sarah Mitchell settled into her plush seat near the window. She stared out at the darkening sky, the vivid colors of sunset now replaced by the deep blues of twilight. Normally, the sight brought her peace, a reminder of how far she'd come from her humble beginnings in rural Georgia. Tonight, however, the lingering discomfort from the airport confrontation weighed on her. She replayed the encounter in her mind, dissecting every detail. It wasn't the first time Sarah had faced judgment based on her appearance, but it stung nonetheless. She had worked tirelessly to rise above societal expectations, earning her success through grit, determination, and unyielding resilience. Yet moments like this reminded her that no matter her accomplishments, some people still saw her through a narrow lens. The flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, approached her with a glass of sparkling water. Ms. Mitchell, would you like anything else before we take off? Sarah managed a polite smile. No, thank you. This is perfect. As the attendant walked away, Sarah pulled out her laptop. Work had always been her refuge, a way to channel her emotions productively. Tonight, she would prepare for an upcoming meeting with a major philanthropic foundation. Her company had recently pledged millions to fund educational programs for underprivileged communities, a cause close to her heart. She opened the presentation slides, but her focus wavered. Instead of graphs and bullet points, her mind drifted to the look on the male officer's face when he had questioned her. His skepticism wasn't about protocol, it was about who he thought she was. Her jaw tightened. How many others had faced similar treatment but lacked the resources or platform to push back? By the time the plane landed in Atlanta, it was past midnight. Sarah's driver greeted her at the private terminal, and she climbed into the back seat of the black sedan. As the car cruised through the quiet streets, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her assistant, Mia. Mia. Hope your flight was smooth. Quick heads up, the airport incident made the rounds on social media. Someone recorded it. Let's touch base in the morning. Sarah's heart sank. She wasn't surprised that someone had recorded the interaction. It seemed every moment of public life was subject to scrutiny these days. Still, she wasn't thrilled about the prospect of becoming the center of yet another viral controversy. The next morning, Sarah sat in her home office, sipping coffee as she scrolled through the online posts Mia had flagged. The video of the incident had indeed gained traction, with thousands of comments debating the officer's actions. Most people were outraged on her behalf, criticizing the police for what they perceived as racial profiling. Others, however, questioned her identity and accused her of overreacting. One comment caught her attention. Why does it matter who she is? No one should be treated like this, regardless of their status. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the words resonating deeply. The commenter was right. While her wealth and position had ultimately shielded her, countless others didn't have that privilege. She thought of her parents, who had faced similar biases in their own lives, but had never been able to speak out. Her father, a factory worker, and her mother, a nurse, had instilled in her a strong sense of justice and a commitment to improving the world for others. Her reverie was interrupted by a call from Mia. Morning, Sarah, Mia said, her tone measured. I wanted to give you a quick rundown. The video has been picked up by several news outlets, and there's a lot of discussion around systemic bias. Some advocacy groups have reached out, wanting to use your experience as a platform to push for change. Sarah sighed. I didn't ask for this attention, Mia. I just wanted to catch a flight. I know, Mia replied. But this could be an opportunity. You've always been passionate about equity and social justice. Maybe this is the moment to amplify that message. Sarah hesitated. The idea of turning a personal ordeal into a public campaign felt daunting, but Mia had a point. If her experience could spark meaningful change, wasn't it her responsibility to act? Later that day, Sarah's decision was made for her when she received an unexpected call from the chief of police in Los Angeles. His voice was calm but contrite as he apologized for the actions of his officers. Ms. Mitchell, I want to personally express my regret for how you were treated at the airport, he said. I've reviewed the footage, and while the officers believed they were following protocol, their behavior was unacceptable. Sarah listened in silence, her emotions a mix of frustration and resolve. Chief, I appreciate your apology, but this isn't just about me. Incidents like this happen all the time to people who don't have the platform to push back. What are you doing to address the root causes of this behavior? There was a pause before the chief responded. We're launching an internal review and implementing additional training programs focused on bias and cultural competency. I'd like to invite you to be part of that process, if you're willing. Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. She hadn't expected such an offer, but the idea intrigued her. This could be a chance to make a tangible difference, not just for herself, but for others who had endured similar injustices. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah balanced her responsibilities as CEO with her newfound role as an advocate for systemic change. She worked closely with advocacy groups, police departments, and community leaders to design programs aimed at fostering understanding and reducing bias. The media frenzy around her story gradually subsided, but its impact lingered. Conversations about equity and accountability gained momentum, and Sarah found herself at the center of a growing movement. Despite the challenges, she remained grounded, drawing strength from the knowledge that her efforts were making a difference. She thought often of her parents and the lessons they had taught her about resilience and justice. Their sacrifices had paved the way for her success, and now it was her turn to pave the way for others. But as Sarah would soon discover, her journey was far from over. The incident at the airport was just the beginning of a larger story, one that would test her resolve and force her to confront deeper truths about herself, her community, and the society she sought to change. As she prepared for what lay ahead, Sarah couldn't help but feel a quiet determination. The road would be long, but she was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The unexpected truth. The bustling energy of Sarah Mitchell's Atlanta office was a stark contrast to the contemplative quiet of her home. As the CEO of a tech giant, Sarah was no stranger to chaos, but today was different. She was preparing for a meeting with community leaders, advocacy groups, and law enforcement representatives to discuss strategies for addressing systemic bias and promoting equitable practices. The meeting was an outgrowth of the airport incident, now a flashpoint for broader societal discussions. The meeting of minds. By late afternoon, the conference room was filled with a diverse group of attendees. Sarah stood at the head of the table, her calm demeanor commanding attention. She began with a measured yet passionate speech about her experience and the larger issues it represented. Bias isn't always overt, she said, her voice steady. Sometimes, it's subtle, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive tone, a skeptical glance. These small actions, repeated over time, erode trust and perpetuate division. We can't fix what we don't acknowledge. Her words resonated, and as the discussion unfolded, she listened attentively to the perspectives shared by others. A young man named Marcus, a community organizer, recounted his struggles with law enforcement. A seasoned police officer, Captain Laura Vega, spoke about the challenges officers faced in balancing security with fairness. The room buzzed with a mix of frustration, hope, and determination. Toward the end of the meeting, Sarah proposed an initiative, a collaborative program between her company, local organizations, and law enforcement agencies to develop virtual reality training simulations aimed at reducing implicit bias. The idea was met with cautious optimism. The anonymous letter. The next morning, as Sarah sifted through her usual pile of emails and letters, one envelope stood out. It was handwritten, with no return address. Curious, she opened it to find a single sheet of paper bearing an anonymous message. You may think you understand what happened at the airport, but there's more to the story. Look deeper. Sarah stared at the note, a knot forming in her stomach. The words were cryptic, but unsettling. What could they mean? Had the airport incident been more than a case of bias? Determined to find out, Sarah reached out to her assistant, Mia. Mia, can you do some digging for me? Sarah asked, handing her the note. I need to know if there's anything unusual about the officers who stopped me. Mia nodded, her curiosity piqued. On it. Unearthing the truth. A week later, Mia walked into Sarah's office, with a folder in hand. You're not going to believe this, she said, setting the folder on Sarah's desk. Sarah opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. The report detailed the backgrounds of the two officers involved in the airport incident. Both had clean records, but the male officer, Sergeant Daniel Harper, had been transferred multiple times due to complaints of misconduct. Most of the complaints had been dismissed for lack of evidence, but a pattern emerged: all the complainants were people of color. More troubling was a recent internal memo hinting at unofficial cleansing protocols at the airport, allegedly aimed at discouraging undesirable travelers from using private terminals. The phrase was vague, but its implications were chilling. Sarah's chest tightened. This wasn't just a personal affront, it was part of a systemic issue. Mia, Sarah said, her voice firm, this needs to come to light. The confrontation. Armed with the information, Sarah arranged a meeting with Chief Bennett, the Los Angeles police chief, who had initially apologized to her. She flew back to LA and met him in his office, her resolve unwavering. Chief Bennett, thank you for meeting with me, Sarah began, placing the folder on his desk. I've done some research, and what I've found is deeply troubling. The chief flipped through the documents, his expression growing grimmer by the second. Ms. Mitchell, I assure you this is not representative of our department's values. Maybe not your values, Sarah replied, but it's happening under your watch. What are you going to do about it? The chief sighed, rubbing his temples. This will require a full investigation. If this memo is authentic, there will be serious consequences for those involved. That's not enough, Sarah said. I want to be involved in this process. Transparency is key if you want to rebuild trust. Reluctantly, the chief agreed. Sarah's involvement would not only lend credibility to the investigation, but also ensure that it remained unbiased. The public unravels. As news of the investigation broke, the public's reaction was explosive. Social media erupted with hashtags like #AirportCleansing and #JusticeForAll, while protests formed outside the airport. Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight, her name now synonymous with the fight for justice. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and participated in town halls, all while continuing her work on the bias training initiative. Her message was clear: this wasn't about vilifying law enforcement, but about creating systems that were fair and just for everyone. Amid the chaos, Sarah received another anonymous letter. This one was more direct. You're on the right track. Keep pushing. The words bolstered her resolve. Whoever was sending these letters seemed to have inside knowledge, but Sarah couldn't focus on their identity now. There was too much at stake. A revelation. Months later, the investigation concluded. The memo was confirmed to be real, and several high-ranking officials were implicated in implementing discriminatory practices. Sergeant Harper was among those dismissed, his pattern of behavior finally catching up with him. But the investigation also revealed something unexpected: the female officer, Officer Clara Jennings, had been the whistleblower. It was her actions that had led to the anonymous letters and ultimately the exposure of the memo. Sarah met with Clara privately to thank her. The young officer's eyes brimmed with emotion as she spoke. I joined the force to make a difference, but I didn't realize how broken the system was until I saw it from the inside. I couldn't stay silent. You've done something incredibly brave, Sarah said, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. Because of you, real change is possible. A new chapter. The incident at the airport had become a catalyst for transformation, not just in Los Angeles, but across the nation. Police departments began adopting the virtual reality training program Sarah's company had developed, and conversations about systemic bias took on new urgency. As for Sarah, she continued to use her platform to advocate for equity and justice. The scars from that fateful night remained, but they also fueled her drive to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. In the quiet moments, she often thought about the anonymous letters. She never discovered who had sent them, but in her heart, she knew they had come from someone who believed in her mission. And for Sarah, that was enough. The ripple effect. Months after the explosive revelations about the discriminatory practices at Los Angeles International Airport, Sarah Mitchell stood on a stage before a packed auditorium. The event, Voices for Equity, had been organized by her company and several advocacy groups to celebrate progress and discuss the path ahead. The audience was a diverse mix of community leaders, law enforcement officials, activists, and ordinary citizens who had been inspired by Sarah's story and the changes it had sparked. The keynote speech. Sarah adjusted the microphone, taking a deep breath before beginning. Change doesn't happen overnight, she said, her voice steady yet impassioned. It takes courage, persistence, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. But most importantly, it takes all of us. The room was silent, her words sinking in. When I was stopped at the airport, I didn't realize that moment would become part of a larger movement. I was just trying to get home. But what I learned is that every injustice, no matter how small it seems, is a thread in a much larger fabric. And when we pull at that thread, we expose the flaws in the entire system. She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. The officers who stopped me weren't just individuals acting on their own biases, they were part of a culture that allowed those biases to flourish unchecked. And that culture isn't limited to one airport or one city. It's everywhere. The audience erupted into applause, but Sarah held up a hand. But let me be clear, this isn't about assigning blame. It's about accountability and the willingness to do better. The people in this room, each of you, are proof that change is possible. A shifting landscape. As the event continued, attendees participated in workshops and panel discussions designed to foster dialogue and share actionable solutions. One of the most anticipated panels featured Sarah, Captain Laura Vega, and Marcus, the community organizer who had shared his story during Sarah's initial meeting in Atlanta. The three had become unlikely allies, working together to bridge the gap between law enforcement and marginalized communities. During the panel, Marcus spoke candidly about his skepticism at the beginning of their collaboration. "I didn't trust the police," he admitted. "How could I? My experiences had taught me that they saw me as a threat, not a person. But working with Captain Vega and her team showed me that change is possible, when there's genuine effort and accountability." Captain Vega nodded, adding, "And it wasn't easy on our side, either. There's resistance within the ranks, a fear that acknowledging flaws makes us weak. But Sarah's leadership and the virtual reality training program have shown us a way forward." The audience hung on every word, the panelists' candor inspiring both hope and determination. The unexpected turn. As Sarah mingled with attendees after the event, a woman approached her. She was in her late 40s, with a professional demeanor and an air of urgency. "Ms. Mitchell, my name is Evelyn Carter," she said, extending a hand. "I work as an investigator for a nonprofit that tracks systemic abuses in public and private sectors. Your story at the airport caught my attention." Sarah shook her hand, intrigued. "Thank you, Evelyn. How can I help?" Evelyn glanced around, lowering her voice. "I believe the airport incident is part of something much larger. Our research has uncovered a pattern of similar practices at other airports across the country, targeting certain demographics under the guise of security. What happened to you may have been the tip of the iceberg. Sarah's stomach churned. Do you have evidence? Evelyn nodded. We're still gathering it, but I wanted to bring this to your attention. Your platform and influence could make a huge difference in exposing this. Delving deeper. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked closely with Evelyn's team. The investigation revealed alarming trends, a shadowy network of discriminatory practices disguised as security protocols, disproportionately affecting people of color and individuals from underprivileged backgrounds. These practices weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a coordinated effort to cater to a select clientele who valued exclusivity above all else. The more Sarah learned, the more determined she became to act. But she also understood the risks. Taking on such a powerful system would inevitably draw backlash. One evening, as she sat in her home office reviewing documents, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mia. Mia. You've got to see this. A new video is trending, it's related to the investigation. Sarah clicked the link Mia had sent. The video showed a young woman being denied entry at a private airport terminal, her pleas for fairness falling on deaf ears. The parallels to Sarah's experience were striking, but this time, the woman hadn't been able to board her flight. Instead, she had been detained for hours without cause. Sarah's chest tightened. This wasn't just a fight for accountability, it was a battle for basic human dignity. Building momentum. Sarah decided to go public with the findings. She organized a press conference, flanked by Evelyn, Marcus, and Captain Vega. The room was packed with journalists, their cameras and microphones trained on her. The practices we've uncovered are not just unethical, they're illegal, Sarah began, her voice unwavering. This isn't about one person or one airport. It's about a system that prioritizes profit and privilege over fairness and humanity. The press conference ignited a firestorm. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and the public outcry was immediate. Protests erupted at airports, and calls for federal investigations grew louder. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah refused to back down. She met with lawmakers, testified before congressional committees, and rallied support for sweeping reforms in airport security policies. A personal struggle. Amid the chaos, Sarah found herself grappling with a deep sense of responsibility. She thought often of her parents, who had taught her the values of hard work and fairness. They had passed away years ago, but their lessons guided her now more than ever. One evening, she visited their graves, the weight of her mission heavy on her shoulders. I'm trying, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm trying to make things better, to honor everything you stood for. But some days, it feels like I'm fighting a battle I can't win. As if in response, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves around her, and she felt a quiet sense of reassurance. She wasn't alone in this fight. Millions of people believed in her cause, and together, they could create lasting change. A glimmer of hope. As the months passed, Sarah's efforts began to bear fruit. Several airports implemented the virtual reality training program, and a federal task force was established to investigate and dismantle discriminatory practices in aviation. The young woman from the viral video became a vocal advocate, joining Sarah on her mission. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Sarah felt that real progress was within reach. She had turned her personal ordeal into a movement that transcended her own experience, proving that even the smallest moments of injustice could spark a revolution. But as she prepared for the next chapter of her fight, Sarah knew one thing for certain: the work of change was never finished. It was a journey, not a destination, and she was ready to keep walking the path. A legacy of change. The winter sun shone brightly over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows across the steps of the Capitol building. Sarah Mitchell stood before a sea of faces, her breath visible in the crisp January air. She was here to address the nation, to reflect on the progress made and the road still ahead. It had been over a year since her fateful encounter at the Los Angeles airport, and the journey since then had been transformative, not just for her but for countless others. A national address. Good morning, Sarah began, her voice resonating through the speakers. The crowd, a mix of advocates, lawmakers, and everyday citizens, fell silent. A year ago, I stood on a similar stage, not as an activist or public figure, but as a woman who had experienced an injustice, she said. What happened to me at that airport wasn't unique, it was emblematic of a system that too often marginalizes the vulnerable while empowering the privileged. But today, we stand together to celebrate the steps we've taken to dismantle that system and to recommit ourselves to the work still to come. The crowd erupted into applause, but Sarah raised her hand for silence. I want to be clear, this isn't a victory speech. It's a call to action. Because while we've made progress, inequity and discrimination are deeply entrenched, not just in our airports, but in every corner of our society. The fight isn't over, not by a long shot. Her words carried a weight that the audience felt deeply. This wasn't just about policies or laws, it was about people's lives and dignity. Behind the scenes. The progress Sarah referred to hadn't come easily. In the months following the press conference where she exposed the systemic abuses in airport security, Sarah had thrown herself into her work with tireless determination. Partnering with Evelyn Carter's investigative team, Marcus's community organization, and Captain Vega's task force, she spearheaded a national campaign for change. Her efforts bore fruit in the form of the Equity in Aviation Act, a landmark piece of legislation that overhauled airport security protocols, increased oversight, and mandated anti-bias training for all employees. The bill passed with bipartisan support, a testament to Sarah's ability to unite people from all walks of life. But her work didn't stop there. Sarah's company expanded its virtual reality training program, adapting it for use in schools, workplaces, and law enforcement agencies. The program's innovative approach to empathy building and bias recognition earned widespread acclaim and became a model for other industries. Despite these successes, Sarah faced constant challenges. She received threats from those resistant to change and criticism from detractors who accused her of overstepping her role as a business leader. Yet she remained steadfast, drawing strength from the people who supported her cause. A personal milestone. Amid the whirlwind of advocacy and reform, Sarah found moments of personal growth and reflection. One such moment came when she was invited to speak at her alma mater, a small historically black college in Georgia. Standing in the same auditorium where she had once attended lectures, Sarah felt a rush of emotion. I remember sitting where you are now, she told the students. Back then, I never imagined I'd be standing here as a CEO, much less as someone advocating for systemic change. But I want you to know that your voice matters. Your experiences, your struggles, and your triumphs, they all matter. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. After the speech, a young woman approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. Ms. Mitchell, your story inspired me to apply for law school, she said. I want to fight for justice, just like you. Sarah hugged her, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her journey was inspiring others to forge their own paths. The tipping point. The movement Sarah had helped ignite reached a tipping point when a coalition of major airlines and airport authorities publicly endorsed the reforms outlined in the Equity in Aviation Act. The endorsement marked a turning point in public perception, signaling that even the most entrenched institutions could change when pressured by persistent advocacy. One of the most poignant moments came during a public hearing where several individuals shared their experiences of discrimination. Among them was the young woman from the viral video that had reignited the national conversation. Now a confident advocate, she spoke eloquently about her ordeal and the changes she hoped to see. People like Sarah Mitchell showed me that we don't have to accept injustice as the status quo, she said. We can demand better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. The hearing concluded with a unanimous vote to implement further measures aimed at promoting equity in public spaces. A legacy cemented. By the end of the year, Sarah's name had become synonymous with change. Time magazine named her one of its most influential people, and she received numerous accolades for her leadership and vision. Yet she remained humble, crediting her success to the collective efforts of those who had joined her in the fight for justice. One evening, as Sarah sat in her office reviewing a proposal for expanding the training program internationally, she received an unexpected call. It was Clara Jennings, the young officer who had risked her career to expose the truth. "Ms. Mitchell, I just wanted to thank you," Clara said. "Because of you, I found the courage to stand up for what's right. I've joined a new department that's committed to reform, and I feel like I'm finally making a difference." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You don't need to thank me, Clara. You had the courage all along." The final chapter. As Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here, she realized that the airport incident had been a blessing in disguise. It had awakened her to a cause greater than herself and allowed her to use her platform for meaningful impact. On the anniversary of the incident, Sarah returned to Los Angeles International Airport, not as a traveler, but as a guest of honor. The terminal where she had once been detained now bore a plaque commemorating the reforms inspired by her experience. As she stood before the plaque, flanked by supporters and colleagues, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. The fight wasn't over, but the progress they had made was undeniable. "I didn't set out to change the world," she said softly. "But sometimes, the world changes you, and you have no choice but to rise to the occasion." And with that, Sarah Mitchell walked forward, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that the seed she had sown would continue to grow long after she was gone.